Here's Kyle Butt to give you 6 terrible arguments for a God's existence.
Socrates once stated that we should follow the argument wherever it leads. When we look at the most profound question of life, does God exist? We should certainly follow his advice. When we do, we'll find evidences that show us God is real.
The only people I ever hear use the word evidences are apologists and creationists.
Let's look at 6 proofs that show God exists. Number 1, the universe must have a cause. The most fundamental law of science is the law of cause and effect.
That's not a law of science at all, let alone a fundamental one. There is a principle of causality, but there is no law by that name.
And it says that for every material effect we see, there is a cause that came before it or was simultaneous to it, and that is greater than it.
You'll definitely never find this law in any physics textbook, at least not one that isn't published by a Christian university press. In physics, there would be no need to specify that what you're talking about is material, because physics, obviously, only deals with the physical. The only reason the word material is in there is because they want to arbitrarily exempt anything supernatural from this so-called law. Secondly, the way the law is phrased is tautological. Of course, for every effect, there's a cause, because an effect is, by definition, an event or entity which is dependent upon a cause. This law would make more sense if it stated that every material event or entity requires a cause. However, it would also be inconsistent with physics. At the quantum level, there are particles which seem to pop into existence uncaused all the time. Thirdly, simultaneous causation makes no discernible sense. If 2 events or entities are simultaneous, the idea that one depends on the other, but not vice versa, is impossible to demonstrate. I think the reason this bit about simultaneous causation is in there is because apologists want to be able to say that a God can cause time to exist without there already being any time in which to carry out an act of creation. You can't cause time to exist if you need time in which to carry out any act of causation. Also, all interactions, that is, anytime anything does anything to anything else, are mediated by the 4 fundamental forces: gravity, electromagnetism, and the weak and strong nuclear forces. And those don't propagate instantaneously. They can only go the speed of light. A cause can't have an effect that is instantaneous if the force mediating that interaction travels at a finite speed. Fourthly, what is meant by the assertion that a cause must be greater than an effect? Greater in what sense? Humans can make all kinds of things that are greater than they are. I can make a pile of rocks that's taller than me. I can make an adding machine that can add numbers faster and more accurately than me. So in what sense must a cause be greater than its effect? If for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, then it seems as though causes can be equal to their effects rather than needing to be greater.
The universe is a material effect. So what caused the universe?
Again, you're begging the question by saying that the universe is an effect. If it is an entity which has no cause, then it isn't an effect. If your contention is that there are no physical entities that are not effects of some cause, you're going to have trouble convincing a lot of quantum physicists of that.
You see, if you don't believe in a creator, then you have to suggest something like a singularity. That's what is popular today, that there was some type of singularity that exploded in something called the Big Bang. But then when you try to get down to the bottom of what's a singularity, well, what we hear from the scientific community that suggests to us, the cosmologists, they say, well, a singularity was something that popped into existence from nothing.
That's something that you might hear from Lawrence Krauss, but he has a very idiosyncratic idea of what constitutes nothing. If by nothing you mean the complete non-existence of anything, well, scientists don't actually say that the universe popped into existence from that, because there never was nothing in that sense. Of the 13.7 billion years that time has been passing, at no time was there nothing. There obviously was never a time when at least time did not exist. Nothing was never a state of affairs. The way apologists seem to conceive of the beginning of the universe is that first there was nothing, then at some later time there was something. If you think of it this way, it makes sense to ask, if nothing changed to something, what caused that change? However, since the beginning was not preceded by nothing, rather it would be clearer to say that it was not preceded at all, there was never any change from nothing to something. If no such change occurred, then there is no need to account for it. There's no need to explain an event that never happened.
Do you know that if there ever were a time when there was nothing, That's exactly what we would have now.
That's right. That's why you won't hear a single scientist say there was ever a time when there was nothing without equivocating the way Krauss does. Obviously, there can never be a time when there was nothing, because at every point in time, at least time exists. However, theists who believe in creation ex nihilo do believe that if you started with nothing, you can end up with something. They just do some special pleading. They say that you can get something out of nothing as long as you have some God magic.
The idea that something popped into existence from nothing is simply not a scientific idea.
Nor is it an idea that any scientist promotes without coming up with some weird idea of what nothing means.
You see, they're suggesting that singularity is somehow natural, but it behaves supernaturally.
Who are they? Nobody suggests that the singularity just magically appeared. It was never preceded by a time when it didn't exist.
They say that singularity wouldn't have followed the laws of nature. Well then, so what are we left with? We're left with the fact that the universe had a beginning, and it was not a natural cause. It was something above nature. It was something super nature.
The singularity only had a beginning in the sense that it is finite in the past. The universe hasn't existed for an infinite amount of time. There was never an event such that there was a change in a state of affairs in which the universe did not exist, followed by one in which the universe does exist. There was never any state of affairs in which the universe, or at least some universe, did not exist.
Something supernatural. And so, when we see the material effect of the universe, we can know that there was a supernatural creator that caused the universe.
Even if the universe needed a cause, what would it mean for a supernatural entity to cause anything? We understand how matter can affect other matter. We see it occur via the four forces. However, what does it mean for something supernatural to affect matter? What mechanism explains that? This is called the interaction problem. And before you even tackle the interaction problem, you have to explain what it even means to say that the supernatural exists. When we say that matter exists, we mean that it has extension and/or location in space-time. But what does it mean to say that the supernatural, which is supposed to be timeless and spaceless, exists? I have never heard a coherent explanation of what it even means to say that the supernatural exists.
Proof number 2. Design demands a designer.
Yet more begging the question. Design, by definition, demands a designer. You can't claim that something is or has design unless you demonstrate a designer first. You can't infer a designer from design without making a circular argument.
It is a truism that everybody recognizes that this universe looks designed. In fact, when we see the various different aspects of nature, and we see birds and squirrels and trees, and we see all of the things that they do so well, many times we as humans, we try to copy and mimic that design, but often we don't do nearly as well as the design that we see in nature. We look at the design of the human body and the human hand and the arm and the leg and the brain, and we see that those are some of the most advanced, technologically savvy pieces of equipment ever put together, and we try to mimic them and copy them, and we can't do it as well. Why? Because this universe exhibits design from the starry sky at night to the fingertips on your hand.
No, it doesn't. What we see are processes with specific consequences. To infer that these processes were created by something with the conscious intent of resulting in these consequences, just because the processes are complex or the consequences are specific, is a non sequitur. Biological processes, for example, have the consequence of the survival and reproduction of the organism in which they occur, which in turn result in the preservation of those processes. The fact that a process has a specific consequence is not evidence that this consequence is some deliberately aimed for purpose of that process.
The design is overwhelming. It's everywhere. Where does design originate? Well, what you and I both know is that when you see things that function and they're complex, that design comes from an intelligent designer.
This is a completely baseless assertion. The fact that a process or structure has a function, which is really just a consequence, and that process is complex, in no way requires intelligence. Complex order can easily build up from simple order.
Big explosions just simply don't bring about order. They don't cause things that are functional and complex to come into existence.
Explosions don't destroy the laws of physics. In fact, explosions behave in ways described by the laws of physics, and it's the regularities described by these laws which create complex order.
The design we see in the universe demands a supernatural, intelligent designer.
Again, complex processes with specific consequences are not the same thing as design.
Proof number 3. Life demands a supernatural life giver. You see, in the material world, we have come to understand that there is a law of biology called the law of biogenesis.
This is another fictional law.
Law of biogenesis simply says this, that in this material, natural world, life comes from previously existing life of its own kind.
This is not something that any biologist believes. Obviously, life had to evolve from simpler chemistry, because that's all that it's made out of. And it's demonstrably false that life only comes from its own kind, because we can directly observe species turn into other species.
Now, when we look at how people used to think about life, they said, no, life can arise spontaneously from non-living chemicals. And yet every single biological experiment has shown us that that simply is biologically impossible. Life doesn't arise from non-living chemicals.
Citation needed. We've never recreated life from scratch, but there have never been any experiments which have demonstrated it to be impossible to do so.
From where did life arise? Where did life originate if it doesn't arise from non-living chemicals? You see, the idea that there's no God suggests to us that there had to be some singularity without a cause that exploded, and that explosion brought about design, which we've never ever seen happen, and then ultimately somewhere the non-living chemicals gave rise to life, but that's biologically impossible.
Since life is only made of non-living chemicals, it's obviously not impossible.
Life demands a supernatural creator. Proof number 4. Moral law demands a moral law giver. If some things are objectively morally right and other things are objectively morally wrong, then there must be a God.
But there are no things that are objectively morally right or wrong. Even if there were a God that dictates moral rules to us, there still would be no objective morality because there would still be no objective reason why that God ought to be obeyed.
You see, if we evolved from primordial slime over multiplied millions of years, at what point did objective moral values arise?
They didn't. And even if there was a God which dictated that we commit or abstain from certain acts, objective laws still didn't arise because, as I said, there is no objective reason we ought to follow these dictates.
We don't look at a dog and say that that dog objectively, morally violated some rule when he steals a bone from another dog. We don't say, hey, he violated a objective moral value. We just don't say that.
I certainly don't. But I don't say that when a person steals from another person either. I simply say that I don't accept such behavior. I don't see any need for an objective basis for my refusal to accept it. I'm not going to accept it whether there is an objective morality or not.
But we do say that humans can perpetrate things that are objectively morally wrong, that humans can be involved in things that are morally right. If that's true, there must be a God.
Even if there is a God, that isn't true.
Proof number 5, free will exists. The atheistic idea that there is no God is founded on the idea of materialism.
No, it isn't. Materialism entails atheism, so if you're a materialist, you're going to be an atheist, but the reverse is not necessarily the case. You can believe in the supernatural without believing in a God.
The idea that this material world is all that there is, all that there was, and all that there ever will be. Because of that, atheism has to suggest that you as a person don't really have free will, that there is no being inside of your body or brain that is supermatter, that really what's going on in your brain is just electrons bouncing around and you're the product of those bounces, and you don't really make decisions on your own. It's just the physical laws and properties going on in your brain.
Let's say there is an immaterial soul that makes decisions. Why does your soul make the decisions it does? Either your soul's decisions are the result of deterministic supernatural causes, or they are random, or they are partly deterministic and partly random. If your decisions are not determined or at least causally influenced by prior causes, then they are random. And if your choices are random, then you're just acting randomly rather than making decisions. Decisions are acts done for reasons. Decisions are the results of causes. It's only if our actions are causally determined that we really ever make decisions. Even if you have an immaterial soul, it only makes sense to say that the soul is making decisions if its actions are causally determined by prior soul states. Otherwise, its actions are uncaused, and uncaused events are, by definition, random. If you are acting randomly, that's not really decision-making. It's only if your actions are done for reasons which cause those actions that you're really making decisions. You're not making decisions if you're just doing things for no reason.
If you are watching this video of your own volition, then the fact of the matter is there has to be a God that can account for that free will that you as a person have. There has to be a God if there is free will.
Now this is just a non sequitur. Even if we must have immaterial souls, that doesn't mean there must be a big, all-powerful immaterial soul that created the universe. And also, if my brain is deterministically causing me to watch this video, how is that not my own volition? If it's my own brain making me watch this video and I'm not strapped to a chair with my eyelids forced open, that's still my own volition. However, if I'm not watching this video because any prior brain state, or soul state if that's the case, is deterministically causing me to, then I'm just watching it randomly for no reason at all rather than doing so deliberately. If nothing is causing me to watch this video, I'm doing so accidentally rather than due to my own volition.
And proof number 6, human reasoning. You see, we reason on a regular basis. We understand abstract ideas. If we were products of blind, chance, random processes over multiplied millions of years, reasoning and the laws of reasoning simply would have no explanation. And yet we reason together on a regular basis.
Well, we're not the products of random processes, and nobody claims we are. We're the products of matter, which behaves in largely very deterministic ways. From the perspective of biology, mutation is for all intents and purposes random, but from the perspective of physics, if we looked at exactly how each and every mutation occurred, we could see exactly how the laws of physics deterministically produced them. If, however, our minds are immaterial and free from behaving in deterministic ways, then there is no reason to expect that they would behave in an orderly way at all. There's no reason to expect them to follow any laws of reasoning.
From where does reason arise? It's got no naturalistic, atheistic explanation.
Why can't the regularity of reason arise from the regularity of matter? How could it arise from an immaterial soul which is completely free of deterministic regularities? It's much harder to imagine a supernatural explanation of reason than a natural one. And even if there were no naturalistic explanation for reasoning, it's an argument from ignorance to infer that it's therefore supernatural.
Antony Flew, the atheist who wrote Theology and Falsification, the most popular atheistic paper for the last 100 years, the last century.
Popular according to whom? How do you measure this popularity? I would say that Bertrand Russell's Why I Am Not a Christian is far more popular.
In 2006, he co-wrote a book titled There Is a God: How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Became a Believer. He stated that his rule of life had always been to follow the evidence where it leads. And he said he followed that evidence. And it led him to the conclusion that there is a supernatural, intelligent God. Let's let the evidence lead us to that same conclusion.
Okay, simply saying what Flew said without even explaining his argument is just name-dropping. It's an argument from authority. Kyle isn't explaining what this argument from reason even argues.
To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.